The Phaedrus is the great lyrical masterpiece in the Platonic corpus. And the primary themes are love and rhetoric. The early speeches, 3 speeches on love, are progressively more philosophical and progressively more beautiful. And they provide us with some things to think about that never really go out of style in the sense that nearly everyone is still a working lover. Love hasn't really disappeared and it hasn't altered. And for that reason, the Phaedrus still speaks to us in a direct and immediate way. Poetry ages better than logic, perhaps. Well, what goes on, or the setting of this dialogue, and it's only between 2 people, between Socrates and Phaedrus, and he wants to know about the nature of love. Phaedrus, he serves as a foil to Socrates, as a man who doesn't understand love, but like all of us has a need to understand it because love tells us something about ourselves. Among the themes that we're going to see in this dialogue is the construction of identity, the construction of personality or the self in the loving interaction, the struggle towards knowledge, towards truth, towards completeness. Now, Phaedrus is an attractive young man, and he's decided to walk outside the city and practice the speech so that he can learn it. Now, symbolism is very important here. When we walk outside the walls of the city, we are moving from the realm of nomos, which is to say convention, political law, towards nature. In other words, the sophists have established a sort of dichotomy between nomos and phusis, between conventional political law and the laws of nature and the facts of life. And by moving from the internal part of the city, we're moving symbolically from nomos to phusis, if you're willing to accept such a distinction. Now, on the way out of the city, Socrates sees Phaedrus, says, well, let's continue on the journey. Let's move outside the city from the realm of the urban area to a lovely pastoral surrounding with a river and some trees and some grass, and let's go back to nature. So the symbolism here is that we're going to examine love as it naturally is, and we'll find out that the nature of love is not diminished by moving outside the realm of political or moral conventions. In other words, Socrates is going to try and undo the distinctions created by the sophists between nomos and phusis. What Socrates is going to do is show us that there's one overarching principle, the orderly and well-disciplined soul, which is true to the ideal of love, both within the city and without. So there's no distinction between the internal desires and the external man. There's no hypocrisy. There's no disjunction between the internal state of the soul and the external state of behavior. They're going to try and unify that. Whereas Phaedrus hasn't reached that point yet. He's ashamed and wants to hide the speech of seduction that he's brought with him. And Socrates says, come on, you know, I want to hear your speech. You can't hide it from me. Come and you can repeat it to me. So they settle down by a river, and the river has mythological implications. It's by this river that Boreas, the north wind, swept away his wife who was a nymph, and apparently there's a combination of marriage and rape involved here, but in particular it's connected with the idea of rhetoric as being somehow forcible, rhetoric as somehow being violent, and the alternative to that will be the true rhetoric that Socrates shows us, which is a combination of dialectic and right rhetorical principles, which allow us to speak the truth simultaneously to speak persuasively. So Socrates is going to teach us about rhetoric and about love in the same discourse, and he's going to teach it to us under a unique circumstance. Outside the walls of the city, which he doesn't do in any other dialogue. Socrates is a creature of the city. Whenever he moves outside its walls, something important is happening. Now let's look at the first speech. Socrates sits down and he has Phaedrus explain this speech to him. And the speech is something like this. The lover is a madman. The lover is insane. And the madness of love is a kind of detrimental insanity, which makes a man harm himself and harm his beloved. In other words, the idea is finding some other person that you desire in the physical sense is the argument that Lysias is making. And you're better off having sex with someone that does not love you because they lack that madness. In other words, this is a deeply corrupt and deeply cynical speech. And
although the transport process has altered your consciousness, you irrevocably remain human. Ergo, concordantly, vis-a-vis. You know what? I have no idea what the hell I'm saying. I just thought it would make me sound cool.
And Lysias obviously really is attracted to Phaedrus, but wants to convince him in a kind of cynical, shallow way that he doesn't love him and that's why he ought to have sex with him. So the idea here is that love is a kind of desire, and love is a corrupting kind of desire. It takes a corrupt soul and makes it more corrupt, and also makes the beloved corrupt, because naturally someone who wishes to possess, to take control of, to take charge of someone else means it for his own benefit, not for the benefit of the beloved. In other words, it's a purely selfish love. And Lysias cannot imagine any love that wasn't completely selfish and that wasn't completely physical. And this is an extremely corrupt love, the kind of love that you would expect of a purely bronze soul. If you remember what the distinction between the gold, silver, and bronze in the Republic, a purely appetitive, consuming soul that has no element of honor, that has no element of spiritual superiority, that has no real love for anything but themselves.
You don't get it. There is a darkness inside of me. It wants to get out, wants to walk around. It wants some walking around money, and it wants to buy some shoes, and it wants to walk up with the people and say, hey, Gator don't play no shit. You feel me? Gator never been about playing no shit. Sweetie, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
So there's a number of corrupt elements, morally dubious, morally evil elements in this first speech. And in addition to this content, this immoral content, the form of the speech is terrible. It's one of the worst speeches ever written. It's the best parody of a poor speech that you could imagine. What Lysias says in the speech is an arbitrary series of paragraphs that don't make any sense in any particular order. He doesn't define his terms. He doesn't try and organize it into a logical progression from one thought to another. All of the paragraphs in this speech, or most of the paragraphs, start with the proposition, and observe this, X, Y, Z, and observe this, A, B, C, and observe this, D, E, F. The point being that you could change the order in any way, and you could still observe all these things. Also emphasize the fact that think about what Plato thinks about knowledge. If you think about the divided line and the myth of the cave. The last thing Plato wants to do is to observe anything. How are you going to learn by observation? That just tells you about the realm of the senses, which is appropriate if you have a completely base soul, if you don't know what real love is, if you don't know what soul love is, if your entire orientation in your emotional life is towards sexual gratification, towards skin sex, towards bodies, well then observing things would be about the best you're ever going to do. It is a purely earthly love, but in the most pejorative possible sense.
Do you know who I am?
No, I can't say that I do.
I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal.
Really?
People know me.
I'm very happy for you.
I'm very important. I have many leather-bound books, and my apartment smells of rich mahogany.
So Phaedrus gives this speech, reads it off the scroll, and Socrates makes a number of ironic comments about it. Phaedrus really admires it. He admires it so much that he's been going outside the city walls so that he can memorize it, because he thinks this is a great tribute both to love and to himself, and he thinks that this is real wisdom about love. And Socrates thinks, thank God I met you and was able to get to you before you memorized this sort of thing. It's a deeply corrupt sort of thing. Sex is something that you do to satisfy immediate bodily desires, and when you gratify yourself, you just move on. It's nothing to get excited about. Take a shower and forget it. It's not a big deal, right? It has no emotional resonance. It has nothing to do with souls. It is meat coming together. And for that reason, it is deeply dangerous to the education of youth. It is the opposite of love. It is the inverse of love. As Socrates will show us a little later on, love is primarily concerned with the benefit of the beloved. Love is primarily concerned with the construction of your own identity in the process of constructing the identity of the other.
Who are you?
Who is but the form following the function of what, and what I am is a man in a mask.
Well, I can see that.
Of course you can. I'm merely remarking upon the paradox of asking a masked man who he is.
Oh, right.
Real love in the Platonic sense, first of all, is highly sexual. It doesn't have much to do with bodies, but it's highly emotive and desiring. It's not a pale ghost of love. Actually, it's tremendous emotional resources and emotional resonance. But here we have the foil of that first, the poor speech. And Socrates says, well, after thinking about it, the only difficulties that I see is that it's false in content and it's incoherent in form. But apart from that, it's a wonderful speech. And of course, Phaedrus says, are you making a joke here? And what's really important about this is that this goes back to the Gorgias, right? And to other dialogues in which people have said, Socrates, are you joking with us? Are you laughing at us? And of course Socrates is joking with you. Of course he's laughing at you. But the fact that he's joking doesn't mean that he isn't serious. This false dichotomy between being serious and being humorous collapses when we deal with Socrates. Of course it's a joke. What could be funnier than a stupid speech about love in which people really don't love each other and in which one person makes the other worse? That's not real love. That's the opposite of that. Everybody else is being much more ironic than he is. They just don't realize it.
Hey, fellas. All right, bring it in. Come on, bring it in. All right, right there. All right, just one, there you go, right there. Anyway.
So Socrates says, I can give you a better speech than that. Right off the top of my head, it's really not a problem.
Now, who wants it?
I do.
All right.
The problem with this speech, with Lysias' speech, is that he treats love as the unreasoning desire for the beautiful, and you want as much of the beautiful as you can, and you want to absorb it as much as you can because it's all about gratification. Socrates says, I'll give you a better speech than that, no problem. What he does, before he gives his first speech, which is the middle speech in the three that are offered in this dialogue, he puts a cloak over his head. I'll explain the symbolism of this in a little while, but he says, before I give this speech, this improved Lysias speech, I'm going to put a cloak over my head, and he does, and then he gives a speech, and it improves on Lysias. It's not the best speech, but it's a wonderfully moving speech. It's certainly a lot better than the speech of Lysias. And if you hadn't seen Socrates' final speech in this dialogue, you would think it was a terrific speech, that you could compare with any of the great speeches on love. Any of the great speeches in Romeo and Juliet would be in the same league. It's just gorgeous. What Socrates does is he says, look, I can improve this speech for the following way. First thing I'm going to do is define my term. I'm going to explain to you what love is. That's a great improvement over Lysias. And then even if I don't have completely true knowledge about love, I can at least move towards an honorable, true opinion about love. And in addition to that, he's going to organize it in a logical progression, which is so important to any kind of Platonic conception of beauty. Beauty both in the beloved, that's one of the reasons why one falls in love, because you see an image of beauty in someone else, but also there's a beauty and a grace and a harmony in this speech itself. It actually moves from a beginning to a middle to an end. It makes sense. And that is attractive to Plato as an intellectual sort of beauty, in the same way that a well-formed horse, right, with a natural proportion between the parts, might be a very attractive figure of the horse compared to one with very disproportionate parts. Well, this second speech, then, is an improved version of Lysias' speech, and what he says is, look...
Nice work, thanks. Thank you, Captain.
I'll do it.
If love is an unreasoning desire for the beautiful, and it's just desire, it's just an emotional impulse, then it's always a bad idea. You should never fall in love if that's what love is. And although Socrates is able to explain love a little better than Lysias ever had, he really doesn't do it justice, because he treats Lysias' assumptions, at least in part, as being true. That love is a kind of mere desire, and that it is an essentially unreasoning desire, and that it is, if not completely selfish, it is at least, it straddles the line between interest in the self and interest in the other. Well, Socrates breaks off in the middle of this speech, and he says, I've just praised the non-lover, or I've just praised the lover, and I've said the best I could about him, but the difficulty is that I don't want to go any further with this. I don't like this, the fact that you've brought me into this dialectic, that you've got me involved in talking about this. Socrates had made a few earlier references to Stesichorus and Ibycus. These are both lyric poets, and here we are in a pastoral setting talking about love. Stesichorus and Ibycus are two of the greatest lyric poets in Greek history, and this is literally Plato's attempt at creating a new and improved lyric. We're in nature, we've moved out of the city, and what's more appropriate to lyric poetry, and we're talking about powerful emotional experiences, which is the stuff of lyric poetry. And Socrates, during the speech, says, I'm becoming dithyrambic. Dithyram is the typical metrical foot of lyric poetry. So Socrates is saying, I'm getting all excited, I'm losing control, I'm not creating the thoroughly logical, organized speech that I usually like to and that I would do if I could, and I don't want to go on with this because I think I've gone down the wrong path. So Socrates says, look, I have to go. Now, at this point, Phaedrus stops him. Phaedrus says, no, stay here. It's scorching noonday, right, because they started at the beginning of the day, went on. It is now scorching noonday. Please, don't go. Finish your speech. And I would like to know more about the non-lover. Praise the non-lover, just like Lysias did. You've made an improvement here, and your speech seems to be better. Take it the whole way.
You don't know what love is.
Love you very much, Francine. You know what you're doing to me? You're killing me inside. Don't eyeball me, man.
Please go. And you two, creepy guys standing in the door.
I think we all experienced our own ballet today. The ballet of emotion, feelings.
You're kind of making things worse.